Hey everyone, Noclip just released their documentary about Fallout 76 and the making of the game. They released tons of cool gaming documentaries about different developers and studios and the production of games. They actually did one covering Bethesda's history for the past 20 years in a separate documentary about a week ago. I'll have both of those linked down in the description below. I'm going to quickly cover off some of the major points I picked up on from the Fallout 76 video, but I do highly recommend you watch it. It's a 40-minute video, so it is a bit of a watch. If you don't necessarily have the time, then this will be the highlights, though still I'd ask that you at least click over on their channel and leave them a like. So the first point I got was that 76 multiplayer was actually designed for Fallout 4, but it was scrapped. Similar to the crafting system in Fallout 4, it was in the game, but they weren't sure if it was actually going to be in the final version, and they decided to keep it, but the idea for multiplayer was too big, so they got rid of it. And what ended up happening was when BattleCry Studios opened in Austin, Texas, they got those guys to work on the multiplayer code because they had some experience with it beforehand. And they actually used the Quake netcode, and they put that into the Fallout 4 engine to get that working. And because the engine was based on this player in a world concept, they had to do a lot of recreation around that idea. So previously, there was one player in a world, and that world was pretty much built around that player. So when you were walking around in Fallout 4, it'll load all of the contents that is near to you. And if you were to set your player movement speed to 10,000 times and you tried walking, your game would constantly be freezing because it couldn't keep up with how quickly you're moving. It'd be trying to load the next area, but it wouldn't have enough of a window to do it. So because Fallout 76 has a bunch of players in a big world, it has to be loading all these different areas, and there's a lot of rework that had to go on. And that included ideas like how many people were going to be on a server, and what would load on the client, and what would load on the server, and where would different pieces be stored. Eventually they came to the conclusion where there's going to be about 24 to 32 players in your map, so that's pretty interesting. And those players will all be marked on your map, so if you pull up your map, you'll see where everybody else is. Who knows, that could change, but for now that is the way it is, and I believe that'll be the way it is at launch and in the beta coming up. When they were designing this game, they looked at West Virginia, because when you think about DC, it's like if there's a nuclear war, then yeah, they would hit there for sure. But West Virginia, a little further off, not necessarily going to be one of those main target areas, let's say. So they worked with a lot of different creatures and the wildlife. So when they talked in the E3 press conference about, the folklore of West Virginia and having these different monsters like the Grafton monster and the Flatwood monster and the Snallygaster and the Mothman, they were able to use ideas like those to help develop new monsters. The Mothman, in fact, in another interview today, Todd Howard was kind of mentioning that it's not your typical monster, let's say. It might follow you around at first, I think, and I think it'll be like a prolonged encounter. You might see it at one point, and then all of a sudden he's gone, and you don't see him again for maybe a few hours of in-game playtime. People at Bethesda were wearing shirts about that thing, so I think it should be pretty interesting to see. It doesn't seem like there's any other Fallout creature like it. On top of that, though, there are way more creatures. There's more insects. There's things like two-headed possums and giant sloths. As one little side note, I noticed in the gameplay they were showing in the documentary that the sloth was actually friendly until you attacked it. So maybe if you see a sloth, when other enemies are around, it can sort of be your ally to help attack a group of super mutants. Until you hit it, it's just kind of chilling, which is pretty cool when you think about a sloth. You wouldn't think it'd be like the aggressor in a lot of those situations. Now, because this game is taking place so much sooner after the bomb drop, so 25 years, they're using that creatively as a way to put in more creatures like this, and especially these more crazier, wackier ones, because maybe this mutation in that first 25 years, when there's a lot of radiation around, was living, but say in another 10 it ended up dying off. So that's why when you look at games like the other Fallouts onward, you don't see those creatures because they died off, and only the more stable ones like say Deathclaws and super mutants continue to live on. This concept even gives us the interesting idea of intelligent plants they were talking about. So I'm not 100% sure how that'll work. Maybe it's going to be some Harry Potter shit where you walk by a tree and all of a sudden it smacks you upside the head. Who's to say? But that definitely seems really cool. On the topic of the map, again, there's these like 6 different areas they talked about. So they said there's a hollowed out mountain, some soggy floodlands, festering toxic wastelands, swampy woods, and a colossal mountain range down the middle of the map. And they say that this mountain range pretty much bisects the map, so it's almost like splitting it off in 2 different pieces. You know, there's a giant mountain range down the middle, kind of hiding one area of the map from you. So when you get over that mountain, it's like this whole new area. And you can see the different dynamic weather systems off in the distance. So if you see a radiation storm coming your way, there might be players running away from that. So maybe you could cut them off or join up with them. One little thing I noticed while they were showing off some of the different areas in the game was that a guy shot this tire that was floating in a pool, and the tire actually lost its air and sunk down to the bottom of the pool. So there could be some more interesting little things like that, where in previous Fallout games, shooting a tire on a tractor did nothing to it. One thing they did have to go back and work on, though, was the animations for creatures. So if you think about a super mutant, typically in most games, unless you have like an AI companion around, it's just kind of getting shot from one direction, right? So the animation of, you know, its head getting knocked back or something could have been a little bit more static. But if you have a giant group of people fighting one of these Scorchbeasts, and it's getting hit from left and right and getting missiles shot at it, there's a lot there to consider with the animations. So hopefully those are looking pretty clean in the actual final game. Another interesting piece that could lend towards the story and locations in the game is that there's a lot of Cold War conspiracy theories around West Virginia. They talk about a radio quiet zone where there's a lot of military intelligence. There's even a presidential bunker under the Greenbrier Hotel in the game. And then they mentioned this hotel and golf course that had something going on, and they talk more about those world building quests. So maybe all of a sudden you open up a secret passage and you find out something weird is going on underground this golf course and hotel. Should be interesting to find out. There's also going to be more clothes and outfits in the game. So they talk about this place called Helvetia, where there's like a lot of different masks, like this owl mask and a skull mask and a jester one. And you can use those in those social features where you're taking pictures of you and your friends and doing all sorts of goofy poses or whatever. On the topic of what there is actually to do in game though, they mentioned that there's different events. So you might find out that super mutants are attacking a location. In the little bit of time I've played Elder Scrolls Online, at least, there was different events going on you could join up and help out with. There could be a big group of players, you know, going to defend one of the farmsteads from a big group of super mutants, and in that case, you could get a lot of really good loot and experience and caps from that. Or, you know that maybe if there's, you know, players over there and you want to go fight them as well as the super mutants and have a PvP VE fight going on, that could be pretty interesting. On top of that, there's also public workshops that they talked about where you can claim a bunch of resources and you can fortify the public workshops for more resources, it sounded like. I didn't fully get what he was talking about. But for instance, he did talk about getting lead, which you can use to make bullets, which is obviously very valuable. One of the next pieces was about the camps, saying that you can pretty much put it anywhere. And when you leave a game and then you join, you know, a different server, if that location is available, if it hasn't been built on top of by another player, then it'll spawn your camp there for you. So as you sign offline, your camp disappears, and when you sign back on, it's put back into the same spot if available. The only places where you can't build camps are outside of the spawn entrance, or the vault entrance, pardon me, because they don't want, you know, griefing and people to spawn camping, basically, you know, newbies coming out of the vault. If, however, the location is taken, then of course your camp's going to be packed up and the blueprint of it will be stored, so you can just spawn it somewhere else when you sign on. One thing I'm personally really excited for is the fact that they're bringing back traits in a way. So they describe diseased foods and mutations that you can get if your rads get too high. In those cases, you will get these traits like Fallout 1 and 2 and Fallout New Vegas even had them, where it gives you a plus and a minus. So one of them in New Vegas, for instance, was that you got more skill points, but you lost 10% experience gained for the rest of the game. There's also one like Small Frame, where you're harder to hit, but you have increased agility, and you do take more damage because you are smaller. Those should be really cool. They've often really mixed up and given a lot of variety to your character in ways you can play the game. They also mentioned that you can remove those if you don't want them, probably through the use of medicine or maybe other perks, or if you did like them, then you could have a way to make them permanent. Tacked on to that as well is weapon condition and the fact that your food can rot. Weapon condition was in other Fallouts. It wasn't Fallout 3, except it was done pretty poorly in my opinion, because for a 10mm pistol, if it got in a worse condition after you used it for a long time, then you had to find more 10mm pistols to repair it with. I'm thinking in this game, if your rifle starts to break down, maybe you'll have to use more screws or more aluminum to make it a little bit better. It also seems like with food, even though there is an option for it to be rotted away and diseased, it can also actually give you some pretty powerful bonuses. They mentioned eating something like a ribeye steak could fully heal you, plus give you even more health on top of that, some bonus HP temporarily. The next piece I was kind of confused on, personally. I still sort of am. They talk about when you level up, you get these perk cards, and there's a limit on the amount of active perk cards you can have. The footage they showed on screen at this time, like, showed a guy having 48 more cards to choose from, or 49 more cards. And they have effects like any perk. So there was Lone Wonder, for instance, which I believe gave you 5% more XP bonus when playing alone, and like 10% more action points or something like that. And there's another one that if you're playing in a group of friends, you gain 5% more XP. Everybody in the party does. And those perk cards can sort of introduce roles to your team. So maybe one guy wants to be the medic, then he can choose a bunch of perks that center around healing his friends and maybe making good food and having a good supply of water and all those essentials for staying alive, whereas one guy focuses on the DPS role and he's really good with guns. Maybe another guy's really good with crafting. You can separate a bunch of roles like that so that not everybody has to be a jack of all trades, but you can sort of master certain ones to help out your buddies. Finishing up the topic of loot, they say that there's tons of loot and tons of recipes, and all of them have pluses and minuses, so I'm interested to see what those are. I wonder if even weapons will have pluses and minuses to them, and obviously armor already does, like power armor for instance, lowers your mobility, but makes you more powerful. So we'll just have to wait and see what that is in the actual game. One of the last things they kind of talked about is that this is still a Fallout game, and they just want people to have fun in that Fallout universe. So he doesn't want to introduce the game in a way where there's like no PvP because one guy might hate it. If it has to be messy at first, then he would prefer that. He doesn't want to take out all the things that make it interesting and all the ways that you can have fun encounters with other people, because that can make the game boring. And they want to introduce other features like 12v12 deathmatch they brought up, for instance. Maybe that's something that'll come down the line. It didn't seem like it was something that's going to be there at the start, but this is an ongoing game. So they thought about games like Destiny and how those games have the end loot, and because the end goal is to take out those Scorchbeasts which are crawling out of the world, and that's sort of the story piece, and you need to nuke those areas, then the flora and fauna are going to change in that area when you nuke them, and it's going to have higher level of loot, better drops, and they want to promote players to nuke areas like that, not just be nuking each other, because if you nuke areas that the game identifies as having good loot, and high end game stuff, when you do attack them, then people aren't just going to be attacking each other all the time. But even if they do, he jokes about like an online Cold War, and maybe that's what one server will end up being, and that could be fun. So they don't want to be afraid of that. They want to let players play around. One of my hopes for the game was that there would be no microtransactions, but one of my predictions was that there was going to be microtransactions. Turns out there are, but it's only for cosmetics, so it's not going to be some like Star Wars Battlefront pay to win shit. It's only for cosmetics, and that means all DLC down the road is free, and having those paid cosmetics means they're able to keep up those dedicated servers. So I think the cosmetics are just going to be things like weapons camos, power armor camos, emotes. You saw that emote thing where people are giving like thumbs up. And then there's the picture frames. So when you're taking poses with your buddies, then, you know, you can have a Vault 76 theme around it. Stuff like that. They do say you can earn it through in-game currency. There's a way to play the game and I guess, you know, build up caps or whatever so that you can actually just purchase that stuff. But otherwise, there is microtransactions. And this is an online game, so they say that they want to have these updates be fast, you know, probably weekly or bi-weekly updates to make sure that any issues are addressed, meanwhile spreading out that free content in between, whether it be every other month or 3 months or something. They want to keep that DLC coming. Anyways, that's it for this video. The documentary is very good. Once again, I highly recommend you check it out. It cleared up a few of my concerns. Made me a little bit more optimistic for the game, I think. I think Bethesda really wants to do justice to Fallout here. It definitely is a risk. There's definitely a lot of people hating it online already, but I'm thinking it could be fun in its own way. So, that's it for this video. Likes, comments, always appreciated. More Fallout content to come. As always, till next time, bye for now.